Yeah, my name is Channing Muller. I'm the president of Pulse for the second year. And my story starts on December 10th of 2011. I woke up feeling a little worse for the wear. I'd been out the night before. Decided it was finally time to kind of get my butt in gear and took one step out of my bed and my heart started racing. I thought I was going to be sick. Went to the bathroom immediately, broke out into a sweat. Didn't end up throwing up. Started to feel tingly all over my upper body. Something was wrong. It's like, okay, I'm not going to get sick. I'm going to go back to bed. I tried curling up. I tried stretching out. Like nothing would alleviate this feeling, and I just felt terrible. I ended up having to use my phone to call my roommate who was on the second floor of my house, and I was in the basement, and ask her to come down because something was wrong. She couldn't help me regulate my breathing at all. I started to get freaked out, so we decided to go to the hospital. Thankfully, I lived 2 minutes from Georgetown University Hospital, which was very beneficial. And after crawling literally through the emergency room doors, they took me straight back. I got aspirin. They tried to, tell me focus at a spot on the wall. We have to do an EKG, and the more that you're moving and shaking around, we're not going to be able to tell what's happened. About 45 minutes after this episode had started, I finally was able to regulate my breathing, and my heart rate slowed down. They looked at the EKG and they saw a delta wave, which usually indicates Wolff-Parkinson-White syndrome, which is another electrical pathway in your heart that basically creates a full circuit, and so your heart kind of goes a little bit crazy. Layman's explanation, I hardly realize it does. But that's the basic way that us people who are exhausted start feeling. And I started to feel better. They're like, hey, we're going to do some blood tests now, stick around for 6 hours, and then we're going to do some more. Takes that long to really determine if there are any cardiac enzymes that have been elevated in your bloodstream. Sure enough, as the day went on, I got more exhausted. 6 hours later came and I got the results of those tests, and it was confirmed I had had a heart attack. I was 26 years old. So I was airlifted to Washington Hospital Center, where I spent the next 3 days in the cardiac care unit undergoing every single test that you can possibly put the heart under to try to figure out why a 26-year-old athlete, I started training for a half marathon at the time, with no family history and low cholesterol, no history of drug use, all of a sudden ended up having a heart attack. There was a blockage determined and found during my cardiac cath procedure. It was about 70%, but because of my age, they decided to treat it with medicinal therapy rather than placing a stent, because the longevity of stents and the lifetime use is unclear at this time. So they gave me a prescription for 5 different medications and cardiac rehab. 5 days later, ended up going home. 1 month later, when I was set to start cardiac rehab, I had just started going back to work, and I had another really tight feeling in my chest. And this was where I'd been having the more I noticed at work when I tend to get stressed out or concerned, the angina would really kick in. I had nitroglycerin tablets, but this time they weren't working. So I called my cardiologist, and after the second one, she's like, if it doesn't improve in 5 minutes, you need to come back. I knew it wasn't improving, and my heart rate was starting to increase rather than slow down, and it was getting worse. So I told my office mate at the time, we need to go to the hospital right now. By the time I got there, I was in the throes of my second heart attack. Couldn't walk in the door. That time I definitely had to be on bed. They brought out oxygen. Went through another round of testing to figure out what had happened here, and the blockage had gotten worse. At that point, it was over 90% blocked, and there was no other option but to place a stent. So they did. To this day, still cannot determine exactly what caused the heart attack to begin with. Did a piece of that blockage break off and get stuck? Did I throw a blood clot? They really don't know. I did have heart damage as a result of how fast my heart was beating. It was over 200 beats a minute when I had gone in, and 1 month of medication had not been enough to help the blockage there and make sure that my blood was thin enough to continue flowing as it should be. So I went home. This time I did go through cardiac rehab. One of the biggest adjustments was my endurance. I went from being able to run 6 or 7 miles, no problem. I had done a 3-day Susan G. Komen walk where I walked 60 miles, to not being able to walk a block without having to sit down and take deep breaths because it was that exhausting. But through rehab and a lot of mental adjustment and patience, I learned to trust my body again, realize what is pushing myself, beyond its limit and what is pushing myself safely, and it made all the difference in the world because I had started to kind of question everything. You know, I'd been doing everything theoretically right, and yet this still happened. I had been a vegetarian for a decade, and this still happened. And so I really had to kind of adjust the way that I looked at things. I was glad to say 1 year afterwards, all of the heart damage had repaired itself. And so with the exception of the stent and the long list of medication that I will continue to take for the rest of my life, there are no indications that I've had a heart attack. And most people obviously looking at me, and I don't look that much different than I did, you know, 5 years ago, you wouldn't be able to tell. So I had reached out to the Heart Association and realized that, you know, I don't want anyone to have to go through what I've been through. By far the absolute worst experience. I would not wish that on my worst enemy. And so the more that I can share my story and help other people to be aware, what are the risk factors and what does it actually look like? You know, this is not an overweight old white man's disease, which is what so many people think. It does affect women, and obviously not everybody is the lucky one who gets to survive it. You know, a lot of it was the shape that I was in to begin with, and a lot of it was luck, you know, and I have faith that thankfully there was a reason that I was supposed to stick around for this, and I never questioned my mortality. I always thought, oh my gosh, this is going to be a humongous pain to come back from. And so I've worked to build teams within my company to do Lawyers Have Heart every year, to participate in the Heart Walk, show up in every single way possible, including working with, you know, the Heart Ball and the Heart Committee to make sure that, like, everyone can see that the face of heart disease is not always the same. And so you never know what someone has been through or what their risk factors are. So if there are some in your family, to look at that, you know, be aware what they are, make the changes that you can. You don't have to be perfect. Nobody is perfect. I still like to have a glass of wine, but at the same time, you got to make the effort. And so I really appreciate the platform, the opportunity that everybody at Heart has been able to give to me to share my story and hopefully help somebody else avoid ever having to experience what it is that I've gone through. So